After Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator, unleashed his brutal war of aggression against Ukraine, he placed pretty much every single EU country, with a couple of predictable exceptions of course, on a list of Russia's enemies. And at that point some of you might have actually thought that Vlad was simply acting out as always and that it wouldn't mean much in effect. Or you could have thought so if you've not been following Russia and don't know much about how the Kremlin regime operates actually. Because you see, being placed on the Russian enemies list means much more than having to listen to hateful BS from the likes of Skabayeva or Solovyev.
Ты еще увидишь, как из-за твоей продажной глупости, Анна Лена Бербок, Берлин будет гореть!
Надо как-то сделать так, чтобы американские солдаты начали гибнуть.
Да мы сотрем в порошок Варшаву и Вильнюс.
Почему мы признаем Францию в ее границах?
Как я хочу посмотреть, чтобы Урсулиха фон дер Ляля корчилась с куском беспилотника в глотке.
Когда на сегодняшний день мы говорим, что война будет безъядерной, мы, наверное, лукавим.
Now, let's forget for a second that it is bullshit, because there's actually a much more serious side to all of this. You see, for Russia, being part of the enemies list actually means something. Vlad is not playing games. We are actually being perceived as an enemy by the Kremlin, and the thugs in Moscow have been acting accordingly. This is Prague Pulse, I'm Jan, and in this video let's talk about one very specific way in which the Kremlin mafia has been attacking Europe over the years, and that is by trying to subvert our elections. On the quite recent examples from Romania, Moldova and Poland, I'm going to show you how this is done exactly. But first I have a favor to ask. My data actually shows that around 90% of people watching this channel right now are not subscribed, so please, if you like what I do at least a little bit, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That would really mean a lot because it helps me grow. And also a huge thank you to those of you already supporting me on herohero.co/PraguePulse. You're free to join them. And now, let's dive in. Don't get me wrong, this is not the 1930s anymore. I mean, in some respect it is, because bigger neighbors think it's okay to steal territory from their neighbors and invade, much like in the 30s. But at least times have now changed in the sense that countries no longer openly declare a war on each other. I mean, countries don't send you a diplomatic note first when they want to attack you and only then start the invasion. Doesn't work like that anymore in the world. By all accounts, Putin has actually been attacking the civilized world already for years now. Not openly, of course, with the exception of Ukraine. Even Putin knows that he would lose in an open confrontation with NATO and with the EU, but he has certainly been at a silent war with us. His aim? Well, simply to weaken and divide us. Because then, should a full-scale war ever happen, it would be much easier to defeat us because we'd already been weakened by him beforehand. And hell, we wouldn't even want to fight in some cases. Just imagine Orban wanted to fight Russia in his current mindset. When the Soviet Union collapsed back in 1991, the Kremlin perceived it as a significant loss of territory. Of course, the USSR was never a true federation, right? Yes, its constitution said that it was made up of 15 equal republics, but of course the constitution said a lot of things and wasn't even worth the paper that it was printed on. It was the Russians calling the shots. They saw themselves as overlords of all the other republics in the USSR because they simply were. And add to those countries, legally part of the USSR, those who were technically independent, but they were in fact puppets of Moscow as well. All of the countries that we regularly talk about on this channel are included among those, of course. Those were de facto colonies of the Kremlin. Everything that happened in those countries was actually closely monitored by Moscow, who was the one calling the shots. And why talk about it now? Well, it's crucially important for the heart of Europe today, because although all of the former USSR republics and colonies together are now formally independent because the USSR is broken apart, the Kremlin has never really put up with that. And the result is that Russia has considered all of this territory, even until this day, including both the former colonies and the former USSR proper, its so-called near abroad. What does that mean? Very simply put, the Russian rulers see the world until today as divided into two spheres of influence. One includes the countries never really part of the Soviet sphere, and Russia doesn't care about them that much, at least not now, because it doesn't have the capacity to. But the second second group is much more important. It is the so-called Near Broad that I just mentioned. And that Near Broad includes all of the former subjects of Russia, both former USSR republics and former satellites. Putin himself said that the region is strategically vital for Russia, which means he basically denies its full sovereignty and reserves the right for Russia to interfere in that region, in the Near Broad, because it still wants to believe that it owns the region and therefore has the right to do whatever it wants inside of that region. Now, out of those countries that Russia wishes to own still, some are dictatorships, much like Russia, more or less Russian puppets already, and they could even soon be subsumed into Russia entirely. With those countries like Belarus, Russia really has no issues because they have been in full control of them already. The real problem is that some countries in the Russian so-called Near Broad, including those in the heart of Europe that we talk about on this channel forever, are now full members of both the EU and NATO, with more or less developed democracies. And the problem for the Kremlin is that those countries really don't want to be anywhere near Russia and don't really want to be owned by Russia at all, which is also where the more or less covert influence simply has to come in from the Kremlin if they really want to keep control of the region. And it also does interfere in the country's elections because it feels that it owns the countries anyway, so why couldn't it control who the countries elect, right? The clearest case from a very recent past, of course, is Romania, where it even went so far that the Romanian Constitutional Court had to scrap the recent presidential vote altogether and order a repeat of the election entirely. So what exactly happened? Well, let's play a game. Try to imagine an ideal candidate for the Kremlin, someone that they really would love to see win in an EU-NATO country. You see him? Well, now meet Kalin Georgescu. He's your ideal Kremlin sweetheart. He has sharply criticized the EU and NATO in the past. He has praised Putin, the dictator, as a true patriot for Russia. He was a vaccine skeptic, because of course he was. He questioned the moon landing. He's opposed to extending LGBTQ rights and expressed admiration for Romania's World War II leader, Ion Antonescu, who actually actively participated in the Holocaust. So that guy was a true Nazi, and Georgescu actually admires him. Plus, of course, I don't even probably have to mention this already, he wants to see all help to Ukraine stopped, which would be really bad news for the country because Romania, also due to its location on the map, is a key logistics hub for all help going to Ukraine from all over the world. And if that help were to stop now, Ukraine would be in serious trouble. And that one factor in itself would be enough reasons for the Kremlin to really want him to win the election, right? Now, one thing is key. Before the election, Georgescu actually was not a complete unknown in Romanian politics. He'd already worked in various ministries and flirted with the right-wing Alliance for the Union of Romanians party. He was even touted as a possible choice for prime minister of that party several times. But it's safe to say, nonetheless, that Georgescu's popularity was never really widespread. In 2022, the party expelled him, by the way, because of his views on Russia that were seen as too extreme even for the ultra-nationalist right-wing party. That tells you a lot in itself. And I mean, the Kremlin really did want Georgescu to win bad. According to declassified intelligence reports by the Romanian intelligence service, there was a massive coordinated influence operation to increase Georgescu's visibility ahead of the recent presidential vote, and that in turn should have increased Georgescu's popularity on social media. This was especially true for the Chinese-owned TikTok, which is incredibly popular in Romania. Just look at the numbers. It actually has a staggering 9 million users, which is nearly half of its entire population. So, I mean, makes sense for the Kremlin that pushing a candidate on TikTok can have an enormous impact on the election result. And the operation was really widespread, it seems. Apparently, some 25,000 accounts were created to push Georgescu. Most of those accounts were created only shortly before the election, so they didn't exist, and then somehow someone coordinated the creation of 25,000 accounts. Through a clever use of hashtags and with the help of a top digital marketing company, the algorithms then increased Georgescu's visibility enormously, because if 25,000 accounts suddenly start posting one single hashtag, that actually gets to the top of the algorithm, and couple that with a really skilled digital marketing agency, and you have quite a deadly cocktail for Romanian democracy. Romanian intelligence is evidenced by the way that the activities were coordinated through a Telegram group. Plus, small influencers were also recruited and paid small amounts of money to also push the hashtags already connected to Georgescu through those 25,000 accounts. And that increased the credibility because people saw real existing influencers pushing the hashtags themselves. And to top it all off, it now seems that TikTok also falsely labeled all Georgescu-related content as entertainment rather than political advertising, which meant the content was spreading even faster, and you have almost a perfect system to push a candidate. Experts warned on the eve of the election that Georgescu actually had become more popular on TikTok in 2 months only than all of the other candidates had in all year combined. And the result? Well, Georgescu went from polling just around 5% at the beginning of November 2024 to winning the first round of the vote only 2 weeks later, scoring around 23% of the vote. And before you start hating in the comments, bear with me, because I'm not claiming that purely Russia is the reason why Georgescu won. Romanians may have had valid reasons to vote against the establishment and maybe even support Georgescu. I'll just give you a few possible reasons. First, the country is still one of the poorest in the EU, and yet it has seen its living costs rise almost twice as much as in the rest of the EU. So some frustrations of the Romanian population are understandable. As one Romanian sociologist puts it, Georgescu succeeded mainly because the mainstream politicians were mediocre at best. And plus, as some studies show, Romania has a tradition of voting for right-wing candidates perceived as strong by the population. So, I mean, it is in any case a worldwide trend recently, right? Just look at the US and Trump.
I have something that others don't have.
Georgescu fits the bill as well. So TikTok has actually only been his vehicle to become visible, and someone, most likely the Kremlin, used that vehicle to increase Georgescu's visibility even more. That is actually exactly Russia's strategy, by the way. It doesn't need to create fake votes or fake candidates in the EU if someone fitting the bill that the Kremlin would support already exists. It only needs to make sure that people vote in a certain way. And if that all means fueling some sentiments that already exist in the society, they will happily do that, of course. Remember how I said at the beginning that the main goal of the Kremlin is to weaken and divide us? Well, that is exactly what they've achieved, even now that the election in Romania has been cancelled. Sure, getting Georgescu elected was the primary goal because that would have meant weakening support for Ukraine, and that goal was now postponed at least because the election has been scrapped. But even now, we're more divided than we were before because Romania and the rest of Europe already started fighting about whether or not it was the right move to cancel the election altogether. Even Elena Lasconi, who was supposed to be Georgescu's liberal pro-Western opponent in the runoff round that never took place, criticized the decision to cancel the vote. Even the liberal candidate criticized it. So again, polarization has increased. And in that sense, the Kremlin has been successful, even now. And in the near future, the Kremlin can be happy even more. Because you see, Georgescu has now essentially become a martyr for a sizable chunk of the Romanian population. For one, he was the clear favorite to win the repeat of the election scheduled for May. He polled way ahead of his biggest rivals. But then in early March, the Romanian Constitutional Court actually barred him from running altogether due to, you guessed it, his continuing ties to the Kremlin. And as you might expect, this sparked massive protests, both inside and outside of Romania, and again increased the polarization in society, with even the likes of US Vice President J.D. Vance criticizing the so-called censorship in Romania. And whatever your opinion on this particular case and on whether or not Georgescu should be allowed to run in the election, clearly the Kremlin is the happy one yet again. And Romania is definitely not the only country where the Kremlin tries to reassert its influence in the so-called near abroad. We've seen very similar things in Moldova, where the recent EU referendum passed by the narrowest possible margin. Again, there was clear evidence of Russian interference. And sometimes Russia's interference can even get much more violent violent than just meddling in elections. The Polish authorities have detained many subjects on suspicions of sabotage and arson. In July 2024, a number of packages intended for DHL cargo planes actually exploded, luckily before being loaded onto the planes themselves, so they were most likely intended to detonate on the planes en route in the air. And it is now suspected that Russia was also behind this. And just a few days ago, Poland actually warned that the Kremlin may be planning terror attacks in the air. So in any case, the region will be worth watching very closely, especially because a number of very important elections are coming up. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so that you don't miss any of our future content. And thanks again to everyone supporting me on herohero.co/bragballs. This has been Jan. See you next time.